So, welcome everybody to our today's session in the continuous testing meetup. My name is Björn. I'm your host today. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors for this evening, which is Source Labs, To Amusement, and Trendic. Our continuous testing meetup is existing for quite a while. I don't know how often you participated. I myself did participate quite a long while ago, so not in the recent ones. And our speaker today is Stuart Day, head of quality and co-founder of Quality Talks. If you have any question during the talk, please feel free to use the chat. Stuart will keep an eye on the chat and either answer directly or in the question and answer session at the end. And by this, the stage is yours, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Braun, and thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. So, hey everyone, I'm Stu Day. I'm going to be talking to you about how to achieve continuous quality. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey. Let me share my screen and we'll get going. Okay, so first of all, the classic question, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, that's the answer I was hoping for. Perfect. So just as a little side note, my slides are here, you're here. I'm not being rude if I'm looking over here, but I will be looking over here for my slides. So let's get going. Achieving continuous quality. And what we're going to talk about is how we achieve continuous quality and what it is, etc. But how we do that through enablers called people, process, tools, and outcomes. And this is something that I've a journey that I've been on for quite a while, and I really want to share this with you. So here's a little bit about me. So I'm been in the industry for 27 years in tech and quality. Um, there's a whole host of different sort of certs and all that kind of stuff and training that I've been on. And as mentioned, I'm also the co-founder of Quality Talks. We have a podcast where we cover a lot of different topics around quality, software testing, tech, engineering, leadership, you name it, we kind of cover it. But more importantly, I'm very much the person on the right here. So I'm a father, I'm a husband. I love kind of coming up with creative ways to share the message around quality and software testing and really bringing a level of passion and excitement to that. I love doing events like these, whether it be online or in person. I do a lot with Ministry of Testing as well, as you can tell by the hat and in the photos as well. But what I really love is just being around people, bringing people together, and sharing that knowledge and that passion and the great ideas that we all have from a quality and software testing perspective. Um, so let's start with a short story then. So kind of this was pre 2020. Um, you know, fair way before that, that this shift left type of notion started kicking in. And there was always everybody was sort of talking about shifting left and making sure you have to shift left and all this kind of stuff. But often it was classed as shift left testing. And for me, it kind of got to the point of like where we were like, okay, so we'll just tell people to shift left. So the industry was saying it. We probably should be following that message and shifting left. But what does that really mean? Over time, the message become more prominent, and everybody was saying, well, everybody should shift left. It became the common statement of what we said on a day-to-day basis. But again, for me, there was something missing. It got to the point where I was kind of like, especially in my roles and other people I was speaking to, okay, so we're shifting left, but what does it really mean? And by that time, you're kind of afraid to ask. But in my head, as I say, there was something missing, and that thing that was missing was okay, we're talking about shifting left, but often we're talking about shifting testing left. But what about quality and actually, looking at quality from a pure holistic point of view? So I started to think about things slightly differently. started to think about, okay, so this concept of shifting, but how do we do that so that we're shifting in all directions rather than just in one direction? And that's where this concept of continuous quality started coming into my mind. So utilizing the term of shift left, but broadening that and thinking about how we can achieve quality in a more continuous way. So shifting left with quality, right with quality, up, down, whichever way you wanted to do it. And I gave my very first talk around this back in December 2020. It was during COVID, it was during lockdown. So I looked very pale, and very isolated at that time. We all were. But I remember giving this talk, and the talk itself was very much focused around ways of working and how we can shift the mindset around moving from this kind of place of having a QA column or a testing column on your board to thinking about how you can do these things continuously. And that's where it kind of all started. But it was still very much for me, still kind of more focused on the testing aspect. In October 2021, so almost a year later, my thinking had kind of evolved even further and started to really look at quality as a much bigger thing, and thinking about it more holistically. And at that time, I was working for a company called Dunelm, and I was head of quality there. And my role was very much to shift the culture from a very much testing focused culture to one that is much more quality focused and holistically how everybody then starts owning that. So I gave that talk, and in that talk, I was able to talk more about some of the things we tried, some of the things we'd learned, etc., etc. And that takes us to now. Okay, so even now, what's that? 3, 4 years later, almost, my thinking around continuous quality has continued to evolve. So, what is continuous quality then? Well, before we can really talk about what continuous quality is, we need to take a moment to ask ourselves what quality is. Because if we don't understand what quality is, there is no way that we can achieve it in a continuous way. So, we all know, or we all like to state that quality is everybody's responsibility. Everybody owns it. But again, we can say this in other organizations, we can say this to people, but if we don't really understand what it means, how can we honestly expect anybody to take ownership? It's like somebody handing you a box and say, here you go, you take responsibility of that without really knowing what's inside it. Um, and then you can't expect people to then be able to contribute to quality in the same way as well. So before we can even think about looking at continuous quality, we need to understand what quality is for the biggest reason of everybody understanding why and what they're potentially going to be owning. So I'm sure everybody on this call has got a mobile phone. Um, there's thousands, millions of people with mobile phones in this world, in this country, in this world. Um, and I'm sure that there's different reasons why you decided to choose the mobile phone that you have. So, for example, you might have an Android phone. You might have decided to go for an iPhone. Some people may still be using a Nokia phone. But ultimately, there's reasons behind that. Those reasons may be because you just like the operating system more than the other. It may be that you like the certain screen size that that type of phone provides to you because you like to watch videos on your phone, as an example. It might be that you really like and need the camera to be really high quality. So therefore, the camera is something that would drive you to buying that type of phone. Um, Years gone by, it would have been cool because of the call clarity you could make. But we're not so keen on making calls these days. It's all WhatsApp and video calls and all that other great stuff. So there's lots of different reasons why you may buy a mobile phone. Some of it may be budgetary related as well. So what can you afford? So what are the things that meet your criteria that also sit within your budget range? So if quality and what drives us to buy something and what meets our needs can be so different, how do you then go about describing it? So often in oh, my slides aren't working properly. Hold on. Oh, here we are. Sorry, they are working properly. So quality is subjective. So it will mean different things to different people at different times, and it's really based on their needs. So based on our needs. So, for example, today I might buy a certain type of phone because my needs it meets my needs. Tomorrow, my needs might change. So tomorrow I might need different functionality. I might need different capabilities. Might need a smaller phone versus a larger phone, for example. Um, so the phone that met my needs the day before that I felt was met my quality needs, the day after may not. So those things change. So it's very subjective. So it's very hard to kind of keep on top of. So in our teams, in the tech world, and in our companies, often we go and turn to these types of metrics as indicators of quality. So things like how many tests have passed and failed. So often, you might be in a conversation and somebody will say, "Well, how many tests have passed?" Well, we've got 90% tests have passed. Okay, so what? So how many have failed? What type of tests are they, etc., etc. But the number isn't necessarily important. It's the impact of the ones that have failed that is important, and also the impact of the ones that have passed. Having a green build in the pipeline, again, we can have green showing everywhere on our dashboards, but it doesn't necessarily mean we've delivered a quality product at the end of the day. Automation and how many automated tests. There's a big driver, obviously, in the industry now to automate as much as we possibly can. But again, just having automation and having lots of automation doesn't necessarily lead to higher quality. So it's something we need to think about. And then things like defects. So often we talk about how many defects have we found in either in the development life cycle or have escaped into production. Now, this can be an indicator of quality and what we've done, but it's not necessarily a defining metric that we can really put a sort of a rubber stamp on and say, if you have a defect, the quality is lower than if you don't have a defect. Because even having no defects doesn't mean you've delivered a quality product, and I'll explain more about that as we move forward. The last one here is very much customer focus and having a happy customer. Um, and for me, that is really kind of the sweet spot of starting to understand more about whether we've really delivered a quality product out the door. But it's not just about a single customer. There's many, many customers. So it might be all the customers that use your end product, but it also might be internal customers that you might be as a team servicing or building something for somebody else to hook into and so on. So if you're building an API, another team could be consuming that API, so therefore they are a customer of yours. So you have to think about all those things. So all the different types of customers. I've worked in retail before, so you've got store customers, you've got store colleagues, you've got delivery teams, you've got warehouse staff, you've got customer call centers, you've got so many different potential customers that you may have an impact on, and therefore you need to understand their needs. So it's very clear that testing alone cannot and does not equal quality. So if you think about what we were talking about earlier with the whole shift left movement, and often the focus was on shift testing left, there's a bigger, broader conversation we need to have for quality as a whole. Testing plays a very, very big part in that, but there's more to it, and we're going to talk more about that. But where do we start? Where can we even start? So, all our organizations are in different places. Some are more mature than others. Some are have higher budgets than others. All these different things can play into how an organization can evolve and how quickly they can evolve. And also the industry that those organizations are sat within. So, highly regulated industry may not be a company in a highly regulated industry may not be able to adapt and move and change and evolve as quickly as maybe in a less in a less regulated organization, or even a startup where things need to move quickly. We need to try different things. We need to evolve quickly. So how do we start shifting the narrative then when we're thinking about talking about quality within our organizations and trying to level the playing field, so to speak? So trying to shift that narrative is really about firstly coming up with some sort of definition of what quality means within your organizations. And within previous organizations that I've worked in at Dunelm and at Capital One, where I am now, we've worked very hard on trying to come up with a term, a narrative, a statement that describes quality and what that then means to everybody. Now, this statement here is my own statement. So this is how I kind of generally will talk about quality within an organization before we actually define our own. So delivering the right value in the right way at the right time based on our customer needs. Now, I mentioned earlier that customer needs change. So it's really important that the right time is a big player in that because what might be their needs today won't be their needs next week, and so on and so on. So being able to move quickly in some of these situations. But the key word there that I've underlined is value. Value and quality for me are intrinsically linked. So coming back to the phone example, the criteria that essentially allowed you to choose your phone is very value orientated. What value does it add to me? And does it meet my needs? And then obviously there's a cost element to that. So you're talking about the cost of something versus the value it adds. Does it all weigh up? Um, so this is why I use this statement, and it helps start a conversation. And from there, what we can then start doing is once we have a narrative, we can then start building more of a framework that can help us drive a different culture around quality. So, culture of quality is a term that we're starting to hear more and more and more in the industry. People are using it a lot. But what I'm really keen is it doesn't just become one of those buzzwords. There is meaning behind it. There is sort of a model or a framework that you can use to help drive and build and grow, excuse me, this type of culture. And what I mean by a culture of quality is that um, quality and how we achieve it is at the forefront of our minds. So it lives within the DNA of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's exhibited through beliefs, values, and principles to deliver value to someone. Um, And if you think about what culture is more generally, it's all about beliefs, values, principles, all those sorts of things, ceremonies, those kind of things that ultimately form a culture. So how do we do that from a quality perspective? And what I'm going to talk you through now is a model that I've over time have evolved. So I've gone from just sort of thinking and talking to actually creating this model that you can kind of take away and utilize in different ways to start driving conversation and maybe start shifting some of the challenges that you have in your own companies. So I spoke about the narrative. So that's the starting point. Okay. So thinking about how you describe quality, and that's not just from a quality professional perspective, i.e., the QAs and the testers and the leadership within the quality space. That's holistically. So thinking about your developers, thinking about your engineering leads, thinking about your product owners, your business analysts, if you have them, your delivery leads holistically, what does quality mean to us? And then going higher and higher and higher, right? If you can get the CTO and CEO involved in those conversations, even better. But coming up with a narrative that everybody can get behind and means something, has a meaning. And then from that, you can start thinking about defining a set of core values. And these are values that people can then start exhibiting every day and upholding. Um, and they connect directly to the narrative. So, as we all have our own values in life, and some of those values will feel much more strongly about than others, and some of them are non-negotiable values. And when it comes to quality, bit of a controversial statement here, but quality is negotiable and it should be negotiable based on the certain context and certain criteria that we have and stuff like that. So something to think about here is those values are there for people to connect into and live and breathe by. So they really need to have meaning and feeling and understanding, and everybody needs to kind of be on that journey together. And then finally, looking at principles. So, principles for me are there to guide um, guide our sort of our behaviors, our engineering processes, practices, our testing practices, that kind of thing. So coming up with a set of principles that again are there that people can utilize and be guided by. They're not there to dictate. They're not there to say you must do X. They're there to give guidance. So, for example, one of the principles that we've recently implemented at Capital One is around automate for enablement. So there's a big push around, embedding automation, and not just from a testing perspective, but more generally around process and deployment and all that kind of stuff. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to get to a place where automation is the goal. So we don't want people to think oh, we just need to automate stuff because that's what we need to do. No, we need to automate to enable us to achieve other things, which will ultimately collectively improve the overall quality of what we can deliver. And that might be we automate for enablement and it enables us to do more exploratory testing, for example. It may enable us to have much more rich conversations because we're not spending so much time, having to test and retest manually and those kind of things. So there's these principles are there to guide, and you can shape them however you like. You can have a couple of principles, you can have many principles, but you don't want too many because it can get a little bit overwhelming for everybody. But they've got to mean something. So quality narrative then. So we've talked about the quality narrative. We've also talked about the core values. We've also talked about building a set of principles. How do we actually enable these things though? So we've got these things, we've got these words on a bit of paper, and people are kind of like, yeah, this sounds really cool. That sounds great. But what do we do then to enable this to actually happen? So for me, this is where sort of the magic ingredients come in. And I define these as quality enablers. And here you'll see four quality enablers. So they're people, process, tools, and outcomes. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these, just very high, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. So for me, everything starts and ends with people. Okay, we can have as much AI as we like, we can have as much tooling as we like, we can have much process as we like, but without people, generally, those things aren't going to be successful. So everything starts and ends with people. So you always have to keep that in mind. Quality is enabled at the very start by people for people. So what are the sorts of things from an enablement perspective sit within people? Well, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Then we've got our processes. So, some organizations are very, very process heavy because they need to be. Some organizations are a lot less process heavy. They're much lighter on process. The key thing is, the question is that you should always be asking yourself is, what are these processes here really for? Are they helping enable quality? Even if it's a quality process, i.e., are they actually enabling quality or are they hindering or disrupting quality? So I've had a lot of conversations over recent years about certain processes, test plans, test reports, all these different things. And my question is always back, do you do these things enable quality? If so, how? And if so, then they are doing their job. If they're not enabling quality, then you know maybe we need to look at something different. So thinking about the different types of processes that you might have and questioning whether they add value from a quality enablement perspective. And then tools. So there's so many tools out there that we can all use. So many tools. Um, Often, we go to those technical tools. So we go to things like frameworks, like Playwright, and all those different good things. But we've got some really, really cool tools like post-it notes. I love a good post-it note. post-it notes, whether it be physical post-it notes, and I've got a bunch of them sitting here on my desk, or it's digital post-it notes when you're doing stuff online digitally, are a great way to capture, facilitate different types of conversations. Um, because you and I could have a really great conversation, but if we're not capturing the output of that in any way, then that becomes meaningless. So being able to capture things in that sort of more dynamic way and being able to move things around is a really great enabler to having great quality conversations, which guess what leads us to higher quality all round. Um, but there's so many more tools, right? There's the technical tools, there's the tools that you use on a day-to-day basis and things like that. And then finally, outcomes. Now, this is a little bit more of a different take on things. So people process tools, okay, yeah, that's obvious, right? But outcomes is for me the missing ingredient. So the outcomes is kind of like the why we're doing these things. It's the building blocks to the bigger picture. So, for example, an outcome as a quality enabler could be around driving higher levels of collaboration. So, we want to achieve higher levels of collaboration. So, through people, process, and tools, how do we do that? Right. So, but the outcomes that we're looking at are outcomes that enable higher quality or better levels of quality. So, it could even be an outcome we're trying to achieve is to release the product that we're developing. Because by releasing the product we're developing, guess what? We start getting feedback on that product. We start learning from that product and we start understanding whether we've actually built the right thing in the first place. So that's another example. So, it's not just about, yes, we've delivered it into production, yeah, we're done, etc. It's about what can you learn from that and what can ultimately help you enable quality further. So here's some more examples then. So in the people space, we have things like behaviors, mindset, the roles and skills that we have for people. So how we structure our teams. So looking at how you shape your team, the roles and skills you have in the team, therefore like the level of training that you might need to create. How do you supplement and create those T-shaped people and T-shaped teams? The environment that we create for people. So being able to ask questions is one of the most powerful tools you will have to driving higher levels of quality. And if you haven't got the environment to enable you to do that, or for people to feel safe, then there's a problem there. So how do we set that environment up for people to feel safe so they can ask questions, etc.? That connects nicely into leadership and leadership playing a massive part in that as well. So creating that environment, but it's not just leadership. How do you do it within your teams? You'll have leaders in your teams, yes, but you are all leaders in your teams as well. And then you've got obviously coaching and training and things like that that you would do to then support people. From a process perspective, we've got things like your delivery methodology. So whether that's agile, waterfall, safe, whatever, doesn't really matter. They can all be enablers to higher levels of quality when done well. You've got continuous testing. You've got build and review processes. So great ways to build quality in as you go. They can enable quality. Release and support, refinement, retros, stand-ups, three amigos practices, all those kind of things. From a tools perspective, architecture, dev and test tools, they're great, but often again, we can get too tool heavy. So ask ourselves, are these tools really enabling us to achieve higher quality, or are they creating that we use? So that the physical devices, like your laptops, etc., comms, collaboration tools, artificial intelligence, all those things, even the network. I don't know how many people have been on a company Wi-Fi and you're trying to do some testing or something, and all of a sudden everything goes really slow, and your tests stop running. All those kind of things that can really hamper it. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is achieve confidence. So if those things are disrupting you, you're not going to achieve confidence. And then finally, the outcome side of things, as I say. So products I mentioned. One of the outcomes we might want to achieve is qualitative feedback. So how can we, through people, process, and tools, enable ourselves to achieve qualitative feedback? Now, that might be in the output from the tests that we write, if we're in automation perspective, but that's only valuable if we actually know and we've had the conversations up front to make sure that the tests that we're writing are adding value, and the error messages are, and all these kind of things. So you want to make sure that that feedback is qualitative, even through Three Amigos processes, through stand-ups, reviews. You're getting qualitative feedback. So again, all these things connect together. Our ability to fail fast. Now, I talked about earlier that in some industries you've got a lot of red tape and regulation. They might not have that ability to necessarily fail fast, because failure could be catastrophic in terms of what industry they're working in. But what does fast mean? Fast in one industry may be completely different in another industry. So again, it's all relative to what they're trying to achieve, um, and so on and so on. But the idea of the outcomes is that each of these things are almost like building blocks. So you can see behind me, right? I love Lego. So if you think of all these individual outcomes as pieces of Lego that ultimately build up to an end product, which is a higher quality outcome, that's what we're trying to achieve here. So if you take all those things and wrap them up into a lovely visual, I love a visual. I just, it makes my world so much happier. I've created this visual. At the core of this is value. So as I talked about earlier, value and quality for me are intrinsically linked. If it doesn't add value, regardless of whether it was, met my budgetary requirements or anything like that, if ultimately if the thing doesn't add value to me, then the chances are I'm not going to think it's of a high enough quality. Um, I can buy something really cheap and it can add huge amounts of value to me. The cost is doesn't really matter. Um, and again, in the Lego boxes, anybody does Lego, they've got these wonderful little lever things that are the most basic thing in the world, but it enables you to break the bricks off easily without tearing your fingers to bits, right? The most simple thing that I never knew I needed adds so much value, and the quality of it is perfect. Um, but you'll see here, people, process, tools, and outcomes all connect together. So independently, they will help you get so far, but ultimately they have to connect. And then that's what drives that culture. Okay. So then what is continuous quality? If that's kind of where we're talking about quality and that culture and how we create that culture, what is continuous quality then? So I want to bring us to talking a bit about agility. Um, So I've worked in many different industries and many different companies in many different methodologies. And one thing I've learned is never get into the debate around agile and waterfall and safe and Kanban and Scrum and anything like that, because you're going to lose the conversation because everybody's got a very strong opinion. So rather than talking about agile and waterfall and all those kind of things, what I look at now is agility. You talk about agility. So, what is the right level of agility you need to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve, or be adaptable enough within your industry to get ahead of your competitors? So, thinking about things in that way. And this is a really, as you can see, a really complex agility scale of one line and two words. But at one end of that scale, you've got minimal agility, and at the minimal end, you'll have organized related struggle getting uh, is the waterfall process. You'll see beneath that is a Kanban board or Scrum board, however you want to shape it. You'll also see that they're very similar in terms of the stages that you have. Now, Agile and Waterfall are two completely different things, right? And people will tell you Agile saves the world and Waterfall's the devil, that kind of thing. But when you look at actually how they're constructed, if you're not careful, you get a thing called Wagile, which is a mix of Waterfall and Agile ways of working. And you end up in this place of just this handoff type mentality. And we're talking here about continuous quality, right? And the concept of being able to embed quality in every possible stage. And that obviously also means testing at every possible stage and as early as possible. And yet, in each of these, you've got a test column, which says to me, well, that's where my testing happens. So if you think about it within your organizations, if you're trying to shift a mindset to say, well, we need to do this stuff continuously, having a testing column can then start saying, well, but this is where we do our testing. This is where the tickets go, and the tester picks them up and does the testing. So how do you start changing that? Because if you don't start changing that, then it starts promoting these types of behaviors. So it will start promoting testing and quality as a phase in a cycle, which is not what we want. It encourages handoffs and silos, which is not what we want because we've already said everybody owns quality. So how do we do that in a collaborative way? We don't want these silos. We don't want our developer to go, well, I've done my bit, over to you. It puts focus on detection and safety nets rather than prevention and continuous feedback. So moving things from left to right on a Kanban board can be really great to visualize where you are in a process, but it shouldn't be what drives your behaviors and what the underpins what you're doing. And then also it encourages phased delivery. So if you're looking to think about trying to support continuous delivery or even the next stage of continuous deployment, it becomes very hard to do that when you've got a model or a working pattern like this. So it starts driving those types of behaviors that are counterintuitive to us achieving continuous quality. And also the concept of continuous testing, of which sits within the overarching continuous quality. So I want to talk about shifting left. Now, I talked about shifting left earlier in my intro, but I talked very much about the concept of shifting testing left and how that was like, doing my brain in back in the time because it was so much bigger. And the reason it's so much bigger is because of what I'm showing here. The benefits to shifting left holistically is far greater than just testing. And by doing it and doing it in the way that I'm talking here, you can start driving common understanding. You can start driving issue prevention. You can start driving earlier continuous collaboration and feedback, which then helps drive higher productivity through collaboration and pair coding and testing and automation, which then ultimately helps you start gaining whole team ownership. Because guess what? If you've got common understanding, your team feel more confident about taking ownership. It helps drive continuous quality in testing, improve product understanding, and ultimately, if you're doing it and your competitors aren't, higher customer value, higher frequency, faster speed, you get that advantage. So I'm sure everybody's heard of shift left, but have you heard of shifting right? Now, shifting right for me is kind of that sweet spot of, yeah, we've done the things that we said we were going to do, or we think we've done the things that we said we were going to do. We've deployed to production. Now, what can we learn? So we can learn a hell of a lot in production that maybe we're not tapping into if we have the right things in place. And we can even learn in production before we even write a line of code. So we can do things like A/B experimentation in production, where we put two different versions of something out there for our customers to interact with, that then tells us which one they prefer. So which one adds more value, which one meets their needs. And then guess what? We take that one and that's what we start building. So from the very start, we're more confident that we're building the right thing because our customers have already told us they value it more because of how they've interacted with it. We can do things like feature toggles, canary releases, where we release behind a switch or we only release to a certain number of customers to start getting feedback and seeing have we have is what we've released having the impact we wanted it to. So there you got to start using data analytics. You can start using synthetic testing, it tests all the time, making sure that you've got the right observation and monitoring in place. All these things are really crucial to being able to shift right and really gain that extra benefit. But there's so much information out there that you can tap into if you know where to look, if you set yourself up for that, for being able to do that. And that all starts by the conversations you have on the left as well. So you can use the right to drive improvement. You can use the right to help you determine what it is you should build in the first place. But also you can use the right to feed back in and say, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we didn't buy the right thing, but build the right thing because our customers aren't interacting with things how we expected them to, and we're not seeing the ROI. But shifting left and shifting right for me is too it's too binary. Because there's so much, where's the middle, right? It's not just like left and right, and where's the middle to this whole thing? So I want us to visualize this differently. So I'm sure you've all seen the DevOps loop, infinity loop, and this is one that I've created for this model. And if you look at this infinity loop, okay, so what's different? Well, the difference being is if you take the model that I showed you earlier and insert it into this infinity loop and basically utilize those enablers at every possible um, part of this process, then you start building in quality as you go. So you're using those enablers in the idea phase. So you can start utilizing techniques and processes like example mapping, which is a great way where you bring people together and start breaking out stories into examples and rules and all this kind of stuff, which really helps drive a better level of understanding and ultimately helps you understand the size of something. Is it the right thing? Can we cut this down? How do we then do an MVP? Um, you know, and I would say MVP is most valuable product rather than most viable product. Um, all those things. So you think about putting these this model into here and thinking about them as a wheel that drives the infinity belt there. And that for me is how continuous quality is created and that's the evolution in my brain about how to kind of bring it to life. But it doesn't stop there. It's great, right? We've got these people in place, we've got some processes, we've got some tools and outcomes, etc. But for me, what's missing, and I said earlier about questions is one of the most powerful things that we can do, questioning. That's where the six Qs of quality come in and the questions that we can ask. Often, the questions that we ask are around what and how. So, what is it we need to build? Maybe we're not embedded early enough into the conversation, right? So, by the time we get to see what the idea is, we're already in the okay, what is it we need to build? And how are we going to build that? And how are we going to test that? And what is it we got to test? And things like that. Whereas, really, what we need to be doing is starting with why. By bringing people into these different stages, you're in a much better place to be able to ask, why are we doing this? Why do we think this is a good idea? What value does this add? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Who's it for? Who's the customer? If you can understand who the customer is, why we're doing it, what value is, or what problem we're trying to solve, the what becomes a lot easier to define. Because you understand why you're trying to build something or what you're trying to solve. How you then go about deciding what it is you're going to build or design, becomes easier, and as does the how. And then you can start thinking about the where. So, this might be, where are we going to deploy this? Where are we going to test this? Where are we going to, even to the point of, where are our teams going to sit? Are they going to be remote? Are they going to be um, together in person? Because we talked about team structure earlier. What makes the most sense for what we need to do and what's going to drive a higher level of quality? Um, and then the classic when. when do we need to do it by? Or when do you want it by? Um, and often it's a when do you want it by? I want it by X rather than when do you need it by? Because want and need are very different. And whenever I give this talk, I always bring my beautiful daughter into the conversation at this point because she's still learning what need and want the difference is. She'll be like, Daddy, I need something. I need it. I really need it. I'm like, do you need it or do you just want it? She goes, my friends have all got it. I was like, okay, so you want it then rather than need it, you know? And often that's what we find within our organizations, right? There is these mythical deadlines that get created by somebody saying, we want it by this date. But if you can have the conversation to then just question that, is that a drop, is that a hard deadline or is that a desirable deadline? And there is some flex there. And the reason why that's really important is because if you have a deadline imposed on you that maybe isn't true, and you get this thing like if we impose a deadline, the teams are going to work harder, they're going to go faster, they're going to do this, right, etc. They're not going to drag their heels. Okay, maybe, but also what they actually build and how they design it and stuff like that and what they design will probably change because they don't have as much time. They're under higher duress. They might start creating more technical debt, which ultimately then creates this whole thing around foundational quality and maintainability and stuff like that. So it's really important that people understand that the impact of imposing a deadline or an unnecessary deadline on a team can have to overall quality, long term as well. So if you take those questions, and it's a bit of a framework, you don't need to ask them in this order or anything like that, but the idea is that, it looks like a flower, it is a flower because we're trying to grow knowledge and understanding. Again, visual, trying to get people connected to the visual. You connect that into this model, right? So you're thinking about, okay, so what questions can I ask at the idea stage, planning stage, build stage, all these different things. And again, it's just a framework and a model that you can use to drive conversation, ask questions, think about how you want to set your teams up, think about how you want to set your technology up, processes, etc., etc. But ultimately, everything should revolve around how these things enable quality. And as I said earlier, you know, quality is negotiable. It absolutely is because it needs to be. If we had all the time in the world, lovely, right? But we need to understand what is the right level of quality we need to deliver to get the benefit and the value to the customer, but also back to the business. Um, and this is where this model starts playing in. So from a continuous improvements and measuring perspective, so obviously you want to be able to measure success. You want to be able to measure whether these things are having an impact both internally and externally on many different levels. And these are some of the different things you can start thinking about. So obviously there's the things like escaped issues into production. So that might be incidents, etc., etc. But that alone doesn't really give you an indicator because if your incidents go up, it doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of your releases has gone down. Now, the reason I say that is because I've been in some conversations about this over the years where somebody's gone, Stu, our number of incidents has gone up by X percentage. And then you look at the number of releases, and our number of releases has gone up by an even higher X percentage. So we're releasing more, substantially more. Yes, our issues have gone up, but overall, the percentage is actually lower in terms of overall number. So the quality is actually improved based on the number of things that we're releasing versus that. But if they just look at the number of incidents, then you kind of get into a very, very difficult conversation because that's not a true reflection. And when you look at any of these metrics in isolation, they can guide you to the wrong information. So it's very important to have context, be able to tell a story. Customer feedback and satisfaction are obviously very, very important. But often people will tell you when it's something's wrong, maybe not so much when something's right. They'll complain, happily complain, but they won't turn around and go, "Hey, you've done a really great job on this thing. Thank you so much. It's made such a big difference to me." No, they won't do that. Now, if you've got reviews like on an app or things like that, you'll get that hopefully because people will interact with it. But again, some people won't bother even leaving a review if it's a good review because they're like, "Well, I'm happy, so I don't need to leave a review." So you only ever get the bad ones, which isn't necessarily great. So you've got to think about different ways to gather customer feedback. And if you go swing to the far right, you have this thing like around customer behaviors. There's great tools out there that monitor customer behavior, say for a website, a mobile app, and how their behaviors change based on, the most recent release that you've put out there. So things like where do customers land in on our website? Is it on the home page? Is it into the product page or wherever it might be? And we've put a release out, and all of a sudden that behavior has changed. So now they're having to go via the homepage versus they could just have gone to the product page before. Why is that? Because now they've got to click through so many more pages to get to where they wanted to be. That's not a great experience. So what has happened there? And you might see customers dropping off because of that. So whereas they might have been happy getting to the product page and been able to search straight away for a product, now if they've got to go through the homepage and there's so many clicks, they'll be like, oh, I can't even be bothered. I'm going to go somewhere else. So you'll see a drop off. So monitoring their behaviors is a really key thing. And then you've got some of the more obvious things that we generally would measure. So things like pipeline trends. So our release of our stability of our pipelines, the health of those pipelines. So again, just because the pipeline's green doesn't mean that we've produced a quality product. Um, because the test could be fast passing incorrectly, for one. Shock horror, people can just code their test to pass. I'm not going to say people do that, but it can be done. Um, but also it's flipping that on its head. If you've got a pipeline that is unstable, that's bad enough. If you've got a pipeline that takes, say, an hour to run and unstable, people are going to be less confident in putting releases out that they haven't, as maybe in a more continuous way. Because guess what? It's going to take them long. If they get an issue, then it's going to take them at least an hour to get it back out, plus the fix. If the pipeline behaves, if it doesn't behave, it could take hours and hours and hours. So they're going to be less confident with kind of doing the fail fasting, as an example, is what we were talking about earlier. Um, Technical debt over time. This is a great indicator of our foundational stability of the code that we write and the things that we build. So, for example, as an end consumer of an app, we may look at it and go, "This is amazing. It does everything that I need it to do." The people that work on that app within the company that produces it have an absolute nightmare trying to change anything on it because of the underlying code base and how that code base has been built and the level of technical debt that's been created because they cut corners here and there because trying to hit deadlines and all that kind of stuff. And I always look at technical debt of saying, like, if you build a house, and I was to build a house, and to start with, I say, right, I just want a house, I want a bungalow, I want a one story house, 2 rooms, right? And I want it to look as aesthetically pleasing as possible. Amazing, right? But what we could do is the foundations for that house could actually be quite lightweight and small because there's not a lot of weight. It's not a lot of, potential of movement because it's one story, all that sort of thing. In a year's time, I say, actually, do you know what? I want to add another layer, another floor to my house. And actually, I want to build out on the side. And I want to, all of a sudden, those foundations are starting to become a little bit suspicious because guess what? They were never designed to do that. And that's how I view our code bases, right? That they are the foundations of what everybody sees. And if we don't maintain them and look after them, then it creates this what's the word? Sort of mirage of what quality really looks like. So on the surface, sorry, iceberg. So on the surface, what you see is this amazing iceberg, but underneath is it's chaotic and you know you can't actually find where you need to go. So these are sort of different things that you can use to measure quality, but a great way to do it and wrap it up is into a maturity model or a health check, where you start taking all those things that I talked about, those enablers, your narrative, your values, your principles, and build out a health check around that, where you have certain questions that you ask your teams or your teams ask themselves to say, are you red, green, or amber in these areas? Really simple way of doing it. And one of those things might be, do you feel safe to ask questions in your team? Are you in the meetings where you can ask questions? And it might be green, yes, we always are. We might be amber sometimes and sometimes not, and it might be red. No, we never get the opportunity. So, and it's really simple, but also during the capturing of that information, it's really about the conversation that's the power. Because then you can understand what exactly is going on. But you can see here, obviously I haven't got the questions, but you can see here automatically, if you each line is a question and the column is a team, you see where you got pockets of maybe hot spots that you can then go and have a look at. So where there's a bunch of yellows, you might go, oh, something might not quite be right there. Or where there's a bunch of reds, you go, we really need to have a look at this. Um, where there's greens, don't assume everything's always going to be okay. So it's like where, just keeping an eye on things still. Good at the moment, but keep making sure you're checking in and stuff like that. So this is a really great way of then starting to measure success and evolution, and every team will be at a different stage. And then final thoughts. We just need to keep innovating and evolving. Okay, so I shared my story at the beginning. Even from the start of that to now, my mindset is evolving all the time. It continues to evolve. I get off this call, I'll have another crazy idea. I'll jot it down. Does it fit? Is there a need for it? Does it add any value to my thinking, to the model? Those kind of things. And the more I do these talks, I run workshops on this as well. I get great insights back that really help kind of formulate the thinking and how valuable this really is to people. But yeah, we need to keep innovating. We need to keep evolving. And obviously, as things like AI step more and more into the mix, that brings different levels of complexity and thinking that we need to go through. I have a podcast. So we've got a podcast called Quality Talks with my co-host and good friend Chris Henderson, who's from up in Newcastle. He's got the most amazing accent. So it's just worth listening to it for his amazing Newcastle accent. But if anybody wants to check it out, that's the QR code. I promise you it's safe. It's the YouTube channel. But also we've got Spotify and we've also got a website, Quality Talks website, which all the content of the podcast, but also blogs, all that kind of stuff is on as well. And also, I'm in the process of writing a book on this particular topic of achieving continuous quality. So all the things I've talked about here will be in the book, and obviously a lot more as well. And that is me. That is everything. So thank you very much for listening. Um, any questions?
We do have in the chat.
Lovely. Let's have a look. Let me bring the chat up. Do. James, hold on, is that the first one from James? I see your the so-called defect rate. I didn't see that at the time, but I see it now. So James Wadley, hi James, you okay? Have you experienced any friction from developers or other team members when trying to drive continuous quality? So yes, I have, absolutely. Um, And I think that the biggest thing there from a learning perspective is trying to build more empathy with them and relate more with them. So rather than trying to push ideas onto somebody, share it as more as a conversational piece around here's an idea, this is what we're thinking, and how would this work in your world? And make it relatable to them. But make it relatable, you need to have empathy and understand their world more. So spend time with your developers and understand what challenges they have and why something like this might be scary, they might feel it's not achievable. It doesn't need to be achievable overnight either. So start having those conversations. But yeah, I've definitely had pushback. But also I've had a lot of developers go, this is really cool. How can we do more? And actually, we're not the problem here. Maybe our product owner is the problem. How do we have the conversation with the product owner? Because they're the ones that are really sort of driving the feature train of let's get stuff out the door. Um, do you have any examples of failure or setbacks in your continuous quality journey, and what have you learned from it? Yes. So I think early days, kind of coming back to what I just said, early days, I was a bit more, we must do this, we should do this, it's obvious we should do this, kind of that, I don't know, being more of a, not a dictator as such, but very confident in the messaging, but just giving that messaging in the wrong way. And that stems back, I mentioned that at the start, I've been in the industry 27 years, and when I started, it was quite a us versus them sort of mentality from a developer and testing point of view, because it was, you'd find a defect and you'd hand it to the developer thinking, yeah, I've got one up on the developer, and it's not actually the case, right? Actually, we're all in this together, and that's something I've learned over the years. And I think early doors when I was trying to have conversations with people about this and it being a new concept, maybe I was a bit too direct with it and sort of that's what I say about learning and having that empathy and bringing others on the journey. Looking at actually, and the model that I've created here is about enablement and giving you things there to hang on to that you can help enable. So you can have conversations in your team and say, from these three, four types of enablers, what are we doing well and what are we not doing well? And having open conversations. So a lot of what I've talked about here is to help drive conversations. Um, and I would say that is in the early days is where I failed and probably had setbacks initially to get buy-in. And I think the other thing is really being mindful. Well, I say being mindful, always being aware that every team is going to move at a different pace. And I've always been somebody that gets very passionate about this kind of thing and wants to, really drive change and influence change and support and coach and mentor. Um, and sometimes my passion can be too much for people. So it's just reining that in and understanding that some teams take longer to come around and stuff like that. And then you've got all the just the more general challenges of organizations, like large organizations, and the red tape you might have to go through. But again, it's all about being able to adapt to those situations, being able to ask the questions, being able to contextualize things for people. I'm a very visual person, as I say, and I like storytelling as a way to connect with people on this kind of stuff. As you saw throughout the talk. So yeah, so there's a couple of areas where definitely I've either failed initially or found it hard, and learnings that I've had. What outcomes tell me that our quality culture is strong or needs improvement? So I would say things like um, when you're looking at your narrative, your principles, your values, one of the outcomes you're trying to achieve is that everybody is understanding those things, everybody is following those things, they're living those things. So if you start seeing people that are maybe they're not even aware of them, and I've been in sessions where you'll pull up the values and say, everybody's aware of these, right? And people will look at you blankly and go, I'm not sure actually. It's like, well, obviously we've got a problem here then because we should, this is something that we need to be better at. And that can come up in the maturity, the health check, maturity health check. So you can have a question in there that say, is everybody confident and comfortable with our narrative and our values and our principles? Are we actively living them, and acting in these ways? And you can have an open discussion. So that's a great way to kind of see that as an outcome. How can I effectively establish and promote a quality narrative, core values, and principles as a QA manager when I don't have direct authority over product teams? This is always the big challenge. And I was having a conversation with my CTO about this today, about being the lone wolf. So even in my role as head of quality at Capital One, um, and even at Dunelm, and actually even before that, often we're set up in these matrix type um, models where we don't have any direct authority over many people. We might have some line people that we line manage, and that might be the quality people, like the quality professionals. But then our developers, our senior developers, our product owners, etc., we don't have authority over. But I want to cling on to the word authority because it's not always about authority, it's about influence. Now, if we can shift it to be more about how can I influence these people in a way where we're driving common understanding, and actually a lot of the work that I've been doing with my team from a center of enablement perspective has been with our product community recently and working with them and running workshops on things like example mapping and understanding, helping them understand how doing example mapping at the start, which is a product-led type of technique and process, can really start driving higher quality and more and higher team efficiency because you're building common understanding earlier. You got less of this kind of backwards and forwards later. You get better confidence and the team are connected to the customer so they get a better understanding of the why, and using that as a way to help influence them. But also, often the key thing for me is like having empathy and understanding their world more, right? Spending time with your product teams and saying, what are the things that mean something to you? What does quality mean to you? What does value mean to you? Right? So when you've got that narrative, you bring the quality, the product community into those conversations. So when you're defining your narrative, they can be part of those conversations. They should be part of those conversations because this connection is we're all driving to the same thing. So I would think about it less about needing authority, but how to gain influence. And for me, gaining influence is building relationships, building empathy, and connecting with people in a way that they feel part of something versus you doing it to them. Cool. Thank you. Have you had pushback from CTOs or senior leadership who still believe that automation is the answer? And how would you recommend somebody who is not ahead of QA handling this sort of pushback? Oh, Philippa, you always get me with something like this, don't you? So have I had pushback from CTOs or senior leadership who think automation is the answer? So I've not necessarily had pushback as such. However, thinking, having that mindset and belief that automation is the answer to a lot of things, yes, definitely. And I think that's where you really need to have an open conversation around, you know, what are we trying to achieve with automation? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So thinking about anything, right? So if we're going to automate something, cool, right? Yeah, we can automate it, but what are we trying to solve? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Um, so for example, bringing it back to another kind of like everyday activity that we do, doing the washing up, right? How many people have got a dishwasher now and just put the stuff in the dishwasher? Because it saves time on washing up, and therefore you can, in theory, you could be using that time you'd be washing up to do something else, maybe a bit more productive, or maybe you're sat watching the telly. I don't know, but either way, it's kind of like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So if you were to go and buy a dishwasher, that conversation might be, well, I spend far too long washing up. I need to save myself some time so I can do something else that is more productive, more valuable. So I get a dishwasher. Same thing with automation. Why are we driving automation? Why do we think automation is the answer? Is the answer to what? What is the question? So if you think automation is the answer, to what question would be what I would be trying to help and have conversations around. Um, and then also from an automation perspective, if you were to, this is a great way of doing this actually, and I've done this recently. If you were to take time and map out your SDLC, so what does your delivery life cycle look like? And then map into that where automation starts or where it starts adding benefit. And then look at the rest of the process flow and look at where automation doesn't really have much of an impact. And then go, all these other places are where we can add quality in that automation can't. Okay, again, visualizing it in a way that can bring it to life for people. So for me, again, it's just trying to do that in a few different ways. But again, trying to understand the why behind the reasoning why they think automation might be the answer. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the question we're trying to answer? Have you been able to change the mindset of leadership and even testers themselves, where they think that test management tools must be used to capture the test plans, cases, suites, to see more value in allowing the QAs testers to focus on the more important quality aspects of development? Or have you seen this tool as still being valuable enough to in its own context? I don't want to be that guy, but I'm going to use the answer of it does depend, but it does depend on a number of things. So context is key. The level of maturity in your teams is key. I think the trust you have, whether you're sat within a regulatory environment or not, where you might be consumed or restricted by audits and auditing. Sometimes you may need this kind of stuff. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have really big test management tools and suites and that kind of thing, because often the auditors aren't specifically going, you should have all this stuff. What they're seeing is they want to see evidence of the things that you're telling us you're doing. So again, thinking about what is the evidence you need to gain confidence and trust in what you're about to release. So I've had a number of conversations over the time where we've moved away from test management tools, and everything that we did was within a definition of done. So and because but it's what you got to remember is it's not just that moment in time of the testing, it's everything that comes before that to give you the confidence that by the time you get to that stage, things should be in pretty good shape anyway. So I shouldn't need to see all these test cases and test suites that have passed and all that other stuff. So test reports for me is a big, I don't see the value in them if you're doing all this other stuff that I'm talking about. But there will always be a time where you may need different levels of test plans, test cases, test suites. We have different processes, at Capital One that we have right now, which are different documentation for different reasons. Similar things when I was at Dunelm and before then, but they all vary. But the thing is, don't just have them for the sake of having them. Ask the question, are they enabling a higher level of quality, or are they becoming a disruptor to that? Because we're spending so much time creating these test plans, these test cases, these test suites, actually it's preventing us from doing more valuable things that could add more value from a quality perspective and enable more quality. So I know it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but I think it does depend on the situation you're sitting within. Bjorn, so do you have, oh, it's just changed on me. Hold on a second. Do you have any recommendations how to deal with the situation that the narrative and behavior from higher levels does not match? So again, I think this is where you need to be mindful of not just trying to create these narratives in isolation. So this is a great example of us doing this at Capital One recently. Is we showcased this to everybody, right? As we were going through it, we invited everybody to be part of it. That included like senior leadership and up beyond, giving people the chance to have a voice. Now they might not take that chance, but trying to get airtime with them is really important. But then kind of just showcasing the progress and saying, here's the latest version of what we're thinking. Can I get some feedback? What do people think? Right. And then if your sort of the higher levels in that situation are actively interacting with you, or maybe they're not, then the question then becomes more around, sometimes you just have to put it out there and then sort of start the sort of the broader the tech world start spotlighting it from a well, we're all doing this but other people aren't. And I've seen that happen when we've had like colleague surveys, and it's been brought up in colleague surveys, and we're not seeing the same behaviors from more senior leadership and stuff like that. But to try and prevent it from happening in the first place, I would say always try and get airtime with them. Try and be as transparent with this kind of stuff as possible. Try and get their input, and but also understand it from their perspective of what does quality mean to them. And even if they don't directly contribute, if you ask them that question and they give you some idea, you can take that and then you can try and build it into the narrative off the back of that. So it's not an easy thing, and again, dependent on the type of people that are in those roles, it can be harder if they're just not forthcoming and wanting to interact. It can become very, very hard. So I know that probably hasn't fully answered the question, Bjorn, but it's again, it's a little bit of a in certain situations you'd have to act slightly differently. Providing feedback on the ROI can be useful. Details on how much is this a details on how much time to spend fixing broken flaky tests versus the benefit you get and not confusing the benefit. Yes. So thank you, James. Yeah, you helped there. Brilliant. Thank you. When will your book be finished? Oh, dude, don't ask me that question. When will my book be finished? When I get more time. It's in progress. I did so James is this is a loaded question from James, people. I have asked James, and I think I've asked you, Philippa, as well, if you would review some of the book that I've already written. So this is a loaded question. I feel spotlighted here. By the end of the year, the book will be done. I promise you that. So put it on your Christmas list. There's a plan there. Put it on your Christmas list.
Be careful.
Indeed, indeed. I think that's it, guys.
Yeah, that's all questions.
Brilliant. Are there any other questions outside of the chat?
I don't think so.
No?
No.
Great stuff. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that, and I hope that obviously through the questions gave you much more, sort of more insight into some of the more of the how. And as I say, it's not easy. It's not like you just snap your fingers and this stuff happens. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. One of the things I will say though is also if you are trying to embark on this journey in your companies or even within your teams and you're finding resistance, don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out to me. We can have a conversation. We can bounce some ideas around. I've seen a lot and I've been faced with a lot of different scenarios and there's different ways you can approach things. And some of that is through just building relationships and building better relationships. But yeah, do by all means feel free to reach out. But this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. I want to know everybody that at the beginning of August or 6th of August, we will have the next session of a continuous testing meetup with Pooja Jagani, speaking about test-driven development and with AI. By this, thank you again, Stuart, and thanks to our sponsors, Source Labs, To Amusement, and Trendic. And I wish you all a nice evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stuart.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bjorn. See you guys.
Bye.